Warning, the following video contains more adult language and content than normal and may cause viewers to act out aggressively or dance the Macarena, whichever comes first. You have been warned.
What's up? I'm JT something. And this is the totally corporate history of rock and roll, the 1990s.
What's all this nonsense about how terrible life is? It's hard to be a young person nowadays. Please, wipe the tears from your eyes, dear. You're breaking my heart.
Ah, the 90s. So much nostalgia. What's interesting for me about the 90s is that this is the first decade that I personally experienced from beginning to end. I even distinctly remember seeing one of the first big hits of the decade on MTV.
Can't touch this. Can't touch this.
That's right, kids. This is what was going on in 1990.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
One of my earliest memories of actually taking notice of full rock albums, knowing the titles to all the songs, was Sting's solo record, The Soul Cages.
All this time, the river flows.
Which is a very dark record grieving the death of his father.
I bury the old man. I bury him at sea.
The other was Eric Clapton's Unplugged album. It was one of the earliest performances on a new program called MTV Unplugged, which would become a staple for the decade.
At least it doesn't matter what you do. You know I'll never really get inside of you.
The highlight of Clapton's Unplugged performance was the ballad Tears in Heaven, dedicated to Clapton's son Connor, who tragically died in 1991.
'Cause I know I don't belong here in heaven.
So yeah, this was my childhood, people, listening to some of the most depressing songs ever written. But not everything I listened to was depressing. In fact, you want to know what the first CD I ever bought was? I'm actually kind of embarrassed by it. Here it is, Jesus Jones.
Right here, right now, there is no other place I wanna be.
Anyway, let's pick up where we left off. Hair metal was still hanging on in 1990.
She's my terrified, proving one such a
But even hair metal was going through a change, as evidenced by the Scorpions' response to the end of the Cold War.
soldiers passing by, listening to the wind of change.
Already you can tell there's much more substance to this power ballad, lyrically and melodically. Let's look at the band Extreme. Their 1990 album, Pornograffiti, contains a couple hair metal and funk metal singles like Decadent Dance. But the song that shot to #1 was an acoustic ballad.
More than words is all you have to do to make it real.
A very gentle song with some nice Beatlesque harmonies and a lone acoustic guitar accompanying them. It too was a welcome change from the excess of the previous decade.
I'd already know.
So now all the metal bands are playing acoustic songs. Mr. Big.
Be the next to be with you.
What's metal about that?
Also the Black Crowes, who I've always said would make for a great Rod Stewart and the Faces tribute act, they had an acoustic guitar-driven hit with She Talks to Angels.
She talks to the angels.
Obviously, with the launch of MTV Unplugged, acoustic songs became the latest fad.
That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion.
Losing My Religion became one of R.E.M's most loved classics. Again, a very simple, straightforward performance featuring Peter Buck's mandolin.
I think I thought I saw you try.
But if you're looking for heavy alternative rock in 1990, there was Sonic Youth's Goo album.
Oh, be your slave, give you a shake. I wanna
Again, bringing punk rock back to its rawest form, Cool Thing is a wild track with singer Kim Gordon's tongue-in-cheek lyrics tackling sexism.
Are you gonna liberate us girls from male, white, corporate oppression?
It even features Chuck D on a few lines.
Fear of the female planet?
Female planet.
So that's what was happening in 1990, but let's move on to a year that really helped shape the decade. It's 1991. Terminator 2 is the biggest action movie ever, Ren and Stimpy premieres on Nickelodeon, and Metallica releases the Black Album! I said Metallica releases the Black Album!
You stupid internet! Why are you not working?
What are you doing?
Oh, hey. Trying to get online, but your dial-up modem's not working.
Dial-up modem? I don't have a dial-up modem.
Maybe if I hit it with the Strat. That seemed to work the last time.
What's that about hitting something with a Strat?
Hey! So, where are we on the history of rock?
Well, do you want to talk about Metallica's Black Album?
Oh, hell yeah, I do. Hey, can you play the riff to Enter Sandman?
In my sleep.
Show off.
I wrote it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. I said to myself, I'm gonna write a really heavy riff that's heavier than anything. No, I didn't say that.
It's kind of hard to believe that Metallica's Black Album is one of the best-selling records of all time.
That is because Metallica's Black Album is freaking awesome!
There's a whole bunch of great songs on here. The real standout other than Enter Sandman was Nothing Else Matters.
I had really no intention of it being a Metallica song.
I know plenty of hardcore metal fans would dismiss this as too mainstream, but you have to appreciate how the band was able to write commercial-sounding songs without sacrificing their heavy sound. This was definitely the pinnacle of heavy metal and Metallica's best album.
But hey, if we're gonna talk about Metallica, it's only fair we talk about Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction.
Metallica's Black Album was a hard act to follow, but Megadeth went with a simpler approach and turned out this gem. It doesn't go for grandiose, it goes for raw and gritty.
And you know Pantera, right?
Oh, of course. They'd been around pretty much as long as the Big Four of thrash, but Walk cemented the subgenre known as groove metal.
You can't be something you're not. Be yourself, by yourself, stay away from me.
What is groove metal exactly?
Well, at this point, metal was splitting off into so many subgenres, it's honestly kind of hard to keep track of it all. Groove metal, alternative metal, death metal, symphonic death metal, Christian metal, Jewish metal, Viking metal, folk metal, I don't even know how the fuck that works, black metal, unblack metal, Scooby-Doo metal, and grindcore.
The hell is grindcore? I'm just gonna go check her computer. It finally finished downloading!
What did?
That clip of Vanilla Ice explaining how Ice Ice Baby is not the same as Queens Under Pressure.
Ours goes ding 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 ding.
Worth it. Totally worth it. Ooh, let's see what else is on Alta Vista.
I'll leave you to it.
Hey, they got 2-second audio clips from Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And at this speed, they'll be able to download in just 3.5 hours. Seriously, folks, this is what the internet was like back in the 90s.
Okay, getting back to 1991, the Red Hot Chili Peppers released Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which I have here some... Nope. Did you take my Chili Pepper CD?
Well, I may have traded it for this VHS copy of El Hazard.
Should have been, could have been, would have been dead if I didn't get a message going to my head. I
am what I am. Most motherfuckers don't give a damn.
The Chili Peppers have been around since the 80s and became known for a particular instant where they came out wearing nothing but socks on their cocks.
You can't come in here dressed like that.
Get with the times, Mo.
I wonder if I snap my fingers.
I would rather we not have this video flagged.
Fine, I'll do it on my podcast.
But the funk rock Blood Sugar Sex Magic was the album that made them household names, especially the alternative rock single Under the Bridge.
Take me to the place I love. Take me all the way.
Though most of the big hits of the album continued to expand the ever-growing rap rock genre, complete with lyrics that made parent groups squirm.
Hear what you say, what I got, you gotta get and put it in you? How about just, what I'd like is I'd like to hug and kiss you.
Wow. That's much better.
Man, how did the Chili Peppers get 2 Simpsons clips in this video? While we're on the rap rock thing, let's check out Rage Against the Machine. The album cover features the famous Vietnamese monk who burned himself alive, and really is the perfect representation of this song. There's only a few lyrics, almost uttered like an angsty mantra, directed specifically at police brutality. And guitarist Tom Morello had some very versatile sounds. Cop Killer, written by Ice-T, was another political protest song against police brutality, and one of the most controversial songs of the decade.
It's not done maliciously in any attempt to make anybody go out and commit a crime.
And once again, the PMRC, George Bush, and even future NRA President Charlton Heston called for a boycott to the song.
Catchy little number, isn't it?
So, let me get this straight. You speak out against songs about gun violence, but not actual gun violence. You know what? I better just get off this subject before a war starts in the comments section.
And obviously these ignorant pigs don't know nothing about music.
So by this point, rock star deaths were not that uncommon, but a few deaths at the turn of the decade came as a terrible shock to so many. Stevie Ray Vaughan died in a helicopter crash in 1990, just after recording an album with his brother Jimmy.
Remember that tick-tock, 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 people. Time's ticking away.
The other was Freddie Mercury. Only 2 days before his death, it was confirmed that Freddie had AIDS and had kept his illness private for a few years.
Those were the days of our lives.
And a lesser-known death was Mother Love Bone singer Andy Wood. At the end of the 80s, they were starting to emerge from the underground Seattle scene, along with Soundgarden, who had just signed with A&M Records, and basically pissed off all their hardcore fans who felt that they had sold out. Sadly, Andy Wood died of a heroin overdose in 1990.
That was, I think, the death of the innocence of the scene.
As a tribute to the fallen singer, Chris Cornell and Matt Cameron of Soundgarden teamed up with Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament of Mother Love Bone to produce a one-off album called Temple of the Dog. The most successful single, Hunger Strike, featured a duet with Cornell and an unknown California singer who was forming a new band with Gossard and Ament, Eddie Vedder.
But I'm going hungry. I'm going hungry. I'm going hungry.
The song definitely foreshadowed a new sound that was about to dominate the decade. So there was this other local band from Seattle called Nirvana. Some of you may have heard of them.
You know that joke's getting old.
Shut up! After moving from the independent record label Sub Pop over to the major label David Geffen, they released a little-known album known as Nevermind. But by Nevermind, I mean the name of the album, not the exclamation, Nevermind.
Are you here to talk to me about the Church of Scientology or how I can lower my Con Ed bill?
I'm doing the history of rock and roll. Is my co-host here?
Oh, her. She's not here right now. I'm subletting her apartment. She's in Kansas.
The band Kansas?
No, the state.
Well, that sucks.
Although it would be cool to be in the band Kansas. All we are is dust in the wind. Anyway, see ya.
Would you happen to be very knowledgeable when it comes to music?
Well, I studied at Juilliard, I was in the Philharmonic Orchestra, I did the national tour of Cats, I created this awesome cover band of Cher called Do You Believe in Life After Cher?
That's great. Do you know anything about Nirvana?
Yeah, sure.
Works for me, come on, let's go!
Whoa!
Okay, so Nirvana's breakout hit was Smells Like Teen Spirit, which starts off with a guitar riff that's just as iconic as Smoke on the Water or You Really Got Me.
Oh man, what an awesome bass.
Oh, you play?
Well, I used to be in this alternative pop-punk Christian symphonic death metal band called The Eternal Struggle. I left after they went mainstream.
Listen, I didn't ask for your life story. Do you know the riff to Teen Spirit?
Duh.
Yep, nobody saw this coming. Teen Spirit was unnaturally popular, featuring Dave Grohl's melodic drum parts.
I didn't throw a bunch of drum fills in there. I kept it as simple as possible.
And Kurt Cobain's raw vocals. And yes, nobody understood what the hell he was singing about. It achieved even bigger popularity on MTV, completely rebranding the network's identity.
When they came out, it just changed the landscape of everything.
And it wasn't just Teen Spirit. Tracks like Come As You Are, Lithium, and In Bloom helped this album knock Michael Jackson's Dangerous out of the #1 slot. That is insane. But what is it about this album that connected with so many people?
We don't consciously think about our music, so we can't explain it. Therefore, interviews are worthless.
What was it about Kurt Cobain that made him such an unlikely rock star?
Well, it doesn't help that he's so hot. He's such a tortured soul. I just hear him sing and it's like he's bearing his soul to me.
Something in the way.
Well, you know, I'm a tortured soul myself. I have to deal with my co-host on a daily basis.
Sorry, my heart belongs to Kurt now.
This is one of the best-sounding rock albums ever made, thanks to producer Butch Vig.
Kurt wanted the record to sound heavy. The songs were really hooky, and he didn't want to come across as sounding too poppy. So if the guitars are roaring and the drums are pounding, that dichotomy, I think, would work for him.
And with that, grunge became the definitive music of the early 90s.
You still have CDs.
Yeah, what's wrong with CDs?
I don't know, I sold all my CDs like a decade ago. Pearl Jam.
What's wrong with Pearl Jam? They're one of the best bands of the decade.
Eddie Vedder's so 90s.
That's the point. Oh, getting pretty hungry, so I hope you don't mind. I'm gonna steal your fish. Yeah.
Who the hell is that?
You know, I've been working with him for a long time. I still don't know. Remember, this was also 1991. There weren't a million singers trying to copy this vocal style yet. Not to mention he was a dynamic frontman, even taking his life into his hands, climbing up scaffolding and jumping into the crowd, all for their amusement.
You survived the last one, so we're gonna take this to some level that people aren't gonna forget.
And 10 is just as rocking as Nevermind, though keeping more in the appetite for destruction frame of mind. I know Kurt Cobain was critical of the guitarist Mike McCready for taking these big, epic guitar solos, but I love them. And the album certainly wasn't without controversy. The song Jeremy was written in response to a high school student shooting himself in class. You could never get away with a video like this today.
Are there any other controversial grunge videos?
Well, let's check in with Soundgarden. Well, I'd call that a big yes.
Chris Cornell, please don't ever do a video with the shirt on again.
Hey man, I just got finished downloading The Dancing Baby from Ally McBeal. Wanna come watch?
Dude, we're talking about grunge right now.
Wait, When did Alex Mack get here? Where's a three-headed Jennifer Beal monster?
Oh, she's in Kansas.
The band Kansas?
No, the state.
Oh. Oh, have you talked about Alice in Chains yet?
I was just getting to that.
Oh, great. Alice in Chains' Dirt, one of the most depressing rock albums to ever hit stores.
The bullet screamed to me from somewhere.
Nothing exemplifies this more than one of their best songs on the album, Rooster.
Yeah, here comes the rooster.
Those albums are generally considered to be the big four of grunge, but there were other Seattle bands like Candlebox. They scored a top 20 hit with the song Far Behind, also in memory of Andy Wood. A little side note, Adam Curry, who played on my album with Seventh Son from the beginning, is now their bass player. I even got to see them in New York not too long ago when they played their 1993 debut album in its entirety.
Oh, I know this one obscure band from Seattle called Bikini Kill. They weren't particularly famous, but did start up a feminist punk movement called Riot Grrrl, which inspired many emerging female rock artists.
One of my favorite bands to emerge from this was L7, who actually gained a bit of notoriety through their album Bricks Are Heavy, also produced by Butch Vig.
Hey, didn't Anita Sparks throw her used tampon into the audience?
Eat my used tampon.
I've seen worse.
Like what?
Well, I watch a lot of hentai.
Stop! Moving on. At this point, grunge had left hair metal in the dust. It even created a rift between Kurt Cobain and Axl Rose.
Axl walked by and Courtney and I just jokingly said, "Axl, will you be the godfather of our child?"
Things weren't going particularly well for GNR after a 1992 concert in Montreal that incited a riot and also left James Hetfield burned from a pyrotechnic.
I walked from the wings right onto where one of them was and just...
He was on fire that night. I am so sorry.
Meanwhile, a lot of underground bands gained followings through a touring festival called Lollapalooza.
Right now, we're talking to Tool. You guys started on the small stage, and today was your first time playing on the big stage, right? Correct.
Lollapalooza?
Lollapalooza.
Lollapalooza.
No,
Lollapalooza.
Lollapalooza, blah, blah.
It was originally centered around Jane's Addiction's farewell tour. But in the years to come, it became a showcase for a lot of alternative bands, including one of the best acts of the decade, the Stone Temple Pilots. And yes, this song sounds an awful lot like Even Flow.
Wait, weren't the Stone Temple Pilots also from Seattle?
No, they were actually from San Diego, even though they sound like they're from Seattle. But by the time they put out the Purple album, they were really developing their own sound. The Smashing Pumpkins also emerged from Lollapalooza.
Today is the greatest day I've never known. Can't wait for tomorrow.
I actually wasn't quite sure if the Smashing Pumpkins should be categorized as a grunge band, but as far as I'm concerned, all this is just rock and roll.
The truth of the matter really is there's no such thing as grunge. It was just kind of invented.
I've even seen Zombie by the Cranberries listed as a grunge song. Never mind the fact that they're Irish, about as far away as you can get from Seattle.
Yeah, but Dolores O'Riordan's vocals are still full of poignant anger. Speaking of Ireland, you didn't mention Oasis.
Oasis is from Manchester.
Well, I'm not a map. I don't know where every band is from.
Hey, do you know Wonderwall?
No, of course. That's a song every guitar player learns when he wants to get girls to like him.
That is such BS.
Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back to you. By now, you should have somehow realized what you're not today.
I'm serious. To this day, Wonderwall is one of the most requested songs to cover. But it's easy to see why. It's a pretty song, as are most Oasis tunes, even if they're just ripping off the Beatles.
Oh no, you can rip off all the John Lennon songs you want in my world.
And speaking of the Beatles, they reunited in 1994. Well, sort of.
Can't go one episode without referencing the Beatles.
Using a cassette John Lennon recorded for a demo, Paul, George, and Ringo went into the studio and finished a tune, Free as a Bird, their first new single since 1970. And around the same time, the Rolling Stones came back with a new album and a pretty cool video to go along with it.
Your love is strong, and you're so sweet. You make me hard, you make me weak.
Man, those dudes are ancient.
Yeah, and remember, this clip is 25 years old. Imagine how ancient they are now.
I'd still rather listen to them than hear the Verve rip them off.
'Cause it's a bittersweet symphony that's I told you once and I told you twice.
That same year, Pink Floyd put out The Division Bell, and I think it's actually one of their best albums.
Hey, what about Tom Petty? He's popular with Brooklyn hipsters right now. Who's calling me? Why are they... it's Kira Buckland again.
Again?
Who's Kira?
Oh, she's Talum and Soul Calibur 6, 2B, and Nier Automata. Play more video games. Hey, Kira, what's up?
How have you been talking about the 90s this long and there's been no mention of Green Day?
Ooh, I love Green Day!
Do you have the time to listen to me whine? I got nothing and everything all at once.
Seriously, Green Day is amazing. They are one of the best bands ever.
Well, it did seem like everybody had a copy of Dookie, probably because they found the title hilarious. I will admit, at the time, I didn't really like Green Day. But I like them now.
You better.
Back then, Green Day was a little too pop for me. They pretty much invented the wheel with pop punk. Well, actually, maybe Blind Melon did it before them.
I just want someone to send me. I sit around and watch them do, but nothing's on.
Really? Because I hear more of the punk than the pop.
You have to admire their ability to come up with catchy pop songs while still maintaining that punk edge in their music that still continued on into the 2000s.
When masturbation's lost its fun, you're fucking lucky.
Hey, what do you guys think of Weezer?
Hey, I gotta go. I'm feeling like kind of a basket case and I need some coffee.
Oh, Kira, are we still on for my podcast next week? You know, the drawing board? Hello? Hello?
Let's show the clip.
What's with these homies dissing my girl? Why do they got her from?
So I'll be honest, I'm just not really interested in it. I don't like the guitar work, I don't like the lead vocals. To me, it's just eh.
Again, at the time, I think I would have agreed with you. However, listening back to the Blue Album or Pinkerton, it really does make sense.
Usually we're just playing power chords, which are really boring, so then I have to sing a really out note to make the whole interesting.
In my tribute video to the Cars frontman Rick Ocasek, I mentioned that he was actually the producer behind the Blue Album. And with his influence, these songs were catchy and impressively raw.
To blow.
Say it ain't
Another big pop-punk record from this time was the Offspring smash hit record, Smash.
Man, all this stuff we're talking about, it's bringing back some heavy nostalgia.
Oh yeah. I mean, this was the popular music of the decade. Unlike the grunge movement, these songs were just a little more upbeat and accessible, while still retaining that adolescent nonconformity theme in the lyrics. 'Cause I'm a 21st century digital boy. I mean, I don't know if it's gonna have as big of an impact on people nowadays.
Okay, we gotta stop the video. I'm really getting some bad nostalgia headaches from this.
Did you eat another brownie?
No, I can't stop thinking about Dunkaroos and
Ooh,
slap brace.
Dunkaroos. 90210. And Jennifer Aniston's hairstyles. Salute your shorts.
Ooh, I love Salute Your Shorts.
Yeah, it's so great.
That was an awesome show.
Oh, hey, all you crazy kids. Let's check out some 9 Inch Nails on the tube. It'll be totally wicked, dog. 9 Inch Nails was the bomb diggity. They also came out of Lollapalooza, but they were no grunge band. They were an industrial rock band using lots of electronic sounds on their records.
Help me get away from myself. I wanna fuck you, I can't help.
Yeah, you know how much I love electronic music.
Shut up, Bart Knocker. Can't you just feel the adolescence just creeping back into you? Watch the video.
Whoa. Yeah. This is cool.
Yeah, Closer was their big hit. They played it was like 94 and it was like all significant and stuff.
Why are they like all covered in mud?
Why don't you explain it, man?
It's like all like, symbolic or whatever.
Isn't his name Mud or something?
No, that's Primus, dumbass. Here, change it.
Oh, yeah! Primus kicks ass!
Whoa, did you hear that? I think he just said if I had my druthers, I'd screw a chimpanzee.
Okay, seriously, you guys? Like, you're starting to really annoy me. Can't you just, like, speak, like, coherently and stuff? God.
Shut up! Diarrhea!
Who said diarrhea?
Oh, yeah!
Hey, what the hell? We were watching that.
The TV was making us all stupider.
Why do I suddenly need TV for my bunghole?
How about we listen to a little Melissa Etheridge? This album was released after Melissa had come out as a lesbian, and songs like Come to My Window became gay rights anthems.
In the 1990s, homosexuality was still a very taboo subject.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
This was the don't ask, don't tell period of history.
You use the word homos in the military. You have insulted thousands of men and women who have put their lives on the line.
The androgynous aspect of rock and roll had always been fighting the masculine archetype of the past.
There were as many gay metal fans as there are other fans of music. We are everywhere.
There's this one moment I love from the 1994 Billboard Awards involving Linda Perry, the lead singer of Four Non Blondes and openly gay.
I have on my guitar, it says Dyke and it says Choice.
Which the camera awkwardly tried to avoid displaying.
I didn't do this for a statement, this is just who I am.
What resulted was 5 minutes of pure rock and roll angst.
Scream from the top of my lungs, what's going on? Yeah.
Oh, that's another meme I gotta download from the internet.
We're in the mid-90s at the moment, and so far so good. A lot of popular stuff to this day still holds up, even from the R&B side of things.
I'm kinda buzzed and it's all because this is how we do.
Even though I'm not a huge fan of R&B tunes relying on sampling and drum machines, a lot of these songs do carry an infectious beat, some catchy melodies, and maintain the theme of simpler ideas. At the time, it felt like you either liked rock and roll or hip-hop, but looking back on it, it really feels like the two complemented each other nicely.
Cash rules everything around me. Green, get the money. Dollar, dollar bill, yo.
In fact, my favorite hip-hop album of all time might just be Tupac's Me Against the World.
Don't wanna make excuses, cause this is how it is. What's the use unless we're shooting? No one notices the youth. It's just me against the world, baby.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Tupac's East Coast rival, Biggie Smalls.
To all the ladies in the place, switch style and grace. Allow me to lace these lyrical dishes in your bushes.
Hey, I've been meaning to ask you since the last episode, what is it about 90s rock that puts it over the 80s for you?
Well, I was actually thinking about this, and it's a few things. Partially, it's nostalgia. I just grew up with this stuff. But like I said, these songs feel more in line with where blues and rock and roll originally started. And sure, it might have been derivative, like you listen to Lenny Kravitz and think this sounds like Jimi Hendrix.
But what I really want to know is, are you gonna go my way?
But this music spoke to us much more than the seemingly unattainable fame of Motley Crue. The one thing I will give the 80s over the 90s is that the decade doesn't lend itself to a lot of guitar hero moments. Like, you're not gonna hear a Randy Rhoads solo coming out of a Counting Crows song.
I like Counting Crows.
I like them too, but I'm not gonna act like they're as tight of a band as Toto. But there's one album which just seems to encompass it all, from heavy drum grooves to face-melting guitar solos to pure rock and roll screaming. God damn it, I almost got away with not hearing that clip in this episode.
Oh, don't forget. 3, 2, 1. Oh, and this anime came out in 1995 in Japan and 1998 in America, so it's actually relevant for this episode.
This song is awesome!
For real and for true? Let's rock out!
Woo!
There's only one way to stop this. I'm serious, people. This may be the greatest rock album of all time. Well, for the most part. It gets a little long in the end, but how can you go wrong with songs like Spoon Man, The Day I Tried to Live, and of course...
Black hole sun, won't you come and wash away the rain?
Wait, isn't this the video where they have all those creepy smiles?
Black hole sun, won't you come?
What's interesting is that I never really saw most of these videos when I was really diving into this album. I just had the CD insert to go off of so I could really pay attention to the music itself. And it's just everything you want from a hard rock record.
Sonically, it was way beyond anything anybody had done.
The real star of the show here is Chris Cornell. And I'm just gonna say it right here. In terms of pure rock and roll vocals, Chris Cornell's performance on Superunknown is the best in rock history.
Really? Mm-hmm. Even more so than Freddie Mercury or Robert Plant?
Well, if not, then definitely in contention. Much like Kurt Cobain, there's an authenticity to Chris that really captures the darkness on songs like Fell on Black Days. And when he screamed, holy Jesus. If you want an example of pure anger-fueled rock and roll screaming, I'd say listen to Limo Wreck.
Yeah, I'm not even going to attempt to sing that high.
I mean, that's high even for me.
Yeah, this really is a peak for rock and roll, both sonically and creatively. So you know it all has to come crashing down at some point.
The spotlight is on not just Soundgarden, but all of us as a flavor of the moment.
These bands started out as an alternative to the mainstream, but now they were the mainstream.
I don't want to become something that I despise.
There was a very public feud between Pearl Jam and Ticketmaster for jacking up prices.
Ugh, Ticketmaster? They're the reason I had to pay $500 to see One Direction.
Why would you pay $500 to see One Direction?
Why would you pay money to see them at all? Despite their best efforts, even boycotting big venues to fight them, Pearl Jam just couldn't sustain their fight against the big corporation, and it kind of killed their career in many ways.
She dreams in color, she dreams in red. Can't find a better man.
But the real casualty of transitioning from indie rocker to world icon was Kurt Cobain.
I didn't care if I was in a band. I didn't care if I was alive.
He seemed to do everything in his power to distance himself from the excessive life of a rock star. When they performed their famous 1993 set on MTV Unplugged, they omitted many of their hits, including Teen Spirit, opting to showcase newer and more obscure numbers. And only half a year later, on April 9th, 1994, Kurt Cobain, a lone casualty of heroin, shot himself at his home in Seattle at the age of 27. I was too young to really know who Kurt Cobain was at the time, but I do vaguely remember news of this breaking out.
This morning, his body found at home, another casualty of success.
For Gen Xers, Kurt's death was felt in the same way Lennon's death was for the boomer generation.
I don't think any of us would be in this room here tonight if it weren't for Kurt Cobain. So.
Well, hey, we still got the mid-90s to go through, and I know a lot of great music came out during that time period.
Oh my god, you have Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah, of course, everybody had that album.
Put this CD in right now. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you gave to me. You ought to know.
Well, you ought to know. I'm not really Dave Coulier.
How do you know that?
I was wondering if this album technically counts as rock and roll, but a lot of these songs are pretty heavy, and with drummer Taylor Hawkins and her touring group, live renditions of these songs were really smoking. Anyway.
Ooh, how about we play some Gwen Stefani?
Wait, Gwen Stefani? She's not rock and roll.
Technically, No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom album is. No Doubt was a really fun ska-influenced band with Gwen Stefani at her best.
Yeah, there was something of a ska revival going on at this time. I mean, remember the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones?
There was Steve Ferris covering that Dexy's Midnight Runner song.
Oh, don't forget Sublime.
I don't practice Santeria. I ain't got no crystal ball.
Almost all of the songs on the album got heavy airplay, such as Santeria, Caress Me Down, The Wrong Way.
So I take her to the chemist the wrong way.
Well, unfortunately, this brings us to another tragedy. Sublime's frontman, Brandley Nowell, sadly died of a heroin overdose in 1996.
Ain't got no time to get old.
And tragedy wasn't just limited to the rock and roll world. Tupac was shot to death also in 1996.
Be a lie if I told you that I never thought of death. My niggas, we the last ones left, but life goes on.
Initially, there was speculation that Biggie Smalls had been behind Tupac's death, but tragically, he too was gunned down only months later.
And if you don't know, now you know, nigga.
This is the bad times. After half a decade of dark, admittedly depressing music in all genres, the deaths of Kurt, Tupac, and Biggie just got too real for everyone. Smash Mouth's 1997 hit Walking on the Sun felt like a response to so much turbulence in this decade.
Just singing and clapping, man. What the hell happened?
I think this shows that the public was ready for some more escapism. Unfortunately, that meant we had to suffer through moments like this.
No, not cheesy Britpop. I'm not going back to the insane asylum again.
Hey, I like the Spice Girls. Girl power.
Yeah, with the exception that the Spice Girls were conceived by a bunch of corporate suits as a marketing plow for young girls.
Come on, tell me you can't resist. Sick.
Don't ever do that in my house again. Although Sporty Spice, or Melanie C, actually put out some pretty good pop rock music around the turn of the decade. Check it out. Anyway, can we hear something else now? Not that!
But I love Nick Carter!
Can we please play something else?
Okay, this hasn't aged that well.
Well, it was nice while it lasted. Pop music had taken over again, and electronic music was reigning supreme. Even bands like the Smashing Pumpkins were experimenting more with drum machines and new production techniques. In fact, probably one of the most influential electronica-inspired rock albums of the decade was Radiohead's OK Computer. In the early part of the decade, Radiohead was a straight-up alternative band with a little bit of an avant-garde edge to them.
We were sort of embarrassed to be a guitar band, really.
But by the time OK Computer came out, they shattered all expectations. And if I can be honest, I've never really known what to think of this album. I love the atmosphere all these soundscapes create, along with Thom Yorke's anti-capitalist lyrics. But musically, it never grabbed me in the same way as Dark Side of the Moon or songs from The Big Chair.
It's up for everybody else to rip off now.
Well, if all you want is generic, meaningless Britpop, you could just listen to Blur.
Wait, the name is Song 2?
Yep. It's just like if Semi-Charmed Life was just called a crystal meth song.
Semi-Charmed Life by Third Eye Blind is a song about crystal meth?
Yeah, listen to the lyrics.
You're goddamn right.
This song was huge, almost a teenage anthem of the late 90s. And despite the darker nature of the lyrics, it's clearly much more upbeat and poppy in its delivery. All right. We all know the song. We heard it enough times back in the day. You sure about that?
No, I want to keep singing it.
3, 4. So yeah, the late 90s were a far cry from the heavier, darker sound of the early decade. Occasionally you might hear something more ominous like the Wallflowers' One Headlight featuring Jacob Dylan.
This place is always such a mess. Sometimes I think I'd like to watch it burn.
Or Korn, one of the early pioneers of nu metal.
What does nu metal even mean?
I don't know, just play the track. But look, if we want to talk about one of the best albums of the late 90s, I got it right here. The Foo Fighters' Color in the Shape. Shortly after the end of Nirvana, Dave Grohl took the frontman role for his new band, the Foo Fighters, proving to be just as strong a songwriter as Kurt Cobain. Everlong may be one of the most loved songs of the decade. But there's a lot of great tunes on this album. My Hero, New Way Home, Monkey Wrench. And they've pretty much continued for the past 2 decades to put out quality rock and roll records. It was sort of a nice blend between the heavy grunge vibe of Nirvana with the more upbeat excitement of pop punk.
Hey, didn't Blink-182 come out at this time?
Unfortunately, yes.
Hey, they released Enema of the State. You don't like that album?
I mean, I kind of appreciate it more now, but at the time I was starting to get my bearings as a guitar player, listening to old blues records and classic rock guitar solos. I didn't care about groups like Blink-182, despite the fact that everyone in middle school tried desperately to play that guitar part.
I took her out, it
was a Friday night, I worked alone to get the feeling right. We started making out, and she took off her pants, and then I turned on the TV. And that's about the time she walked away from me. Nobody likes you when you're 23. Okay, I hate to break the fun vibe right now, but there's a few incidents we need to get out of the way before we can end this video. One was the shooting of Columbine High School on April 20th, 1999. I was in middle school when this happened, and it was a scary time. And like everybody else, I was just asking myself, how could this happen? But instead of looking into real problems that honestly haven't still been solved to this day, the media decided to use industrial rocker Marilyn Manson as their scapegoat. Why? Well, because apparently the shooters were fans of his music.
If you were to talk directly to the kids at Columbine, what would you say to them if they were here right now?
I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did.
You know, looking back at all the times society chose to use rock and roll as their scapegoat.
I know how it feels when you sing it.
Whether it was Elvis shaking his hips, the Rolling Stones singing about sex, or whatever Tipper Gore didn't like. The fact that in 1999, which is only 20 years ago, people were still blaming rock and roll for influencing children to do unspeakable acts just enrages me.
I don't know. Limp Bizkit kinda incited a riot at Woodstock 99.
It's time to take all that negative energy and put it the fuck out. It's all about the he said bullshit.
Okay, whose fucking idea was it for the anniversary of the Woodstock Peace and Love Festival to include Limp Bizkit on the bill?
I kinda like Limp Bizkit back in the day. Look, I was 16, I was full of rage and hormones. They were angry and grungy. I was into it. Yeah, don't shake your head. I mean, it was, look, for anyone out there on the internet, I'm sorry I gave the money. I'm sorry I made them famous. I'm sorry I gave Fred Durst my money. Please, I beg of you. I learned my lesson. To be fair, it wasn't necessarily Limp Bizkit's fault that Woodstock 99 became so notoriously out of control.
I say, Fred, I think you kind of incited a riot. They started ripping down buildings and the scaffolding, and that's the plywood you were surfing on.
It was hot, food and water were ridiculously overpriced.
Quick! I need some water!
$8. Not in this lifetime.
And it just overall felt more like Altamont than Woodstock.
Just because a girl out there wants to feel free and take her shirt off doesn't mean a bunch of you have to go grab her tits and stuff, because they're her tits, they're not yours. You gotta leave those tits alone.
During the Chili Peppers set, a fire started, burning down an audio tower.
Holy shit, it's Apocalypse Now out there.
This is partially why the whole mosh pit era of concerts was soon thwarted by concert promoters. And 1999's charts were dominated by pop artists like Ricky Martin and especially Britney Spears.
Hold on, you are not about to bash Britney Spears.
What are you doing?
Oh, baby, how was I supposed to know that something wasn't right here?
Look, if you liked Britney back in the day, that's fine. I certainly didn't mind looking at pictures of her. But I kind of feel the same way about her as I do about Madonna, especially since the industry would go back to valuing image over substance from this point on.
If you say one more bad thing about Britney Spears, I'm going to punch you in the face.
Yeah, dude. I mean, there's far worse stuff coming out of 1999 than Hit Me Baby One More Time.
Like what?
Ladies and gentlemen, you may want to sit down for this. I'm sorry to say. We're going to be talking about Creed.
I'll show you everything with arms wide open.
You try to prepare for the worst. You spend your whole life. But nothing can prepare you for this moment. Creed might have been one of my most hated bands of all time. I've been teasing this since the very beginning of the series. Is there even a point in going into detail about how much he sounds like Eddie Vedder?
Eddie Vedder joins Creed frontman Scott Stapp.
Give me back my voice.
Okay, I take back what I said about Eddie because this sounds dated as hell.
Can you take me higher? If you don't stop singing like Scott Stapp, they'll never find your body. They were notoriously bad live, with Stapp actually giving Axl a run for his money and alcohol abuse. Also, I've never really been able to find out if they're officially a Christian rock band or not. I got nothing against Christian rock bands. I mean, who doesn't love Faith Plus One? But their whole vibe just felt so disingenuous and totally unoriginal. I mean, objectively speaking, I can't say they're technically that bad. In fact, I think for this video, I disliked listening to Limp Bizkit more than Creed. But God, does listening to Stapp's voice bring back some bad memories. Okay, we gotta end 1999 with something positive.
What about that Santana tune with Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20?
Yeah, that's pretty cool, but I got just the thing. Make Yourself by Incubus. Ooh, it's glowy. This was a huge album when it came out, also featuring some electronic production. They even had a DJ for some reason.
Dude, it was 1999. Everybody had a DJ.
But their songs are filled with unique guitar parts, interesting drum grooves, and Brandon Boyd singing some of the most memorable tunes of the time.
Brandon Boyd. Why does that name sound familiar?
It's not the same Brandon Boyd you're thinking of.
Well, what about Will Novice and
Okay, and that ends the history of rock and roll, the 90s, and the end of the 20th century. So that brings us to our end question. Did the 90s rock hard? A definite yes for me, at least for the first half of the decade. Listening back to these CDs was a fun trip down memory lane, and they still sound so timeless, focusing on more organic sounds. I stand by my statement that the 90s is when they got it right for recording rock records. They got it absolutely right.
It might be the nostalgia factor hitting me too, but for me, the 90s themselves were like the last great decade for music in general. Before the over-reliance on technology, where you could hear some truly great, innovative music that I'm still discovering today in one form or another.
It wasn't glamorous or about hitting the high rock notes. It was just raw emotion. And it was great to see more younger, outspoken artists, many of whom were female. The 90s was a time when the younger generations really had a voice.
Even that annoying hippie bum gave me some valuable insight when it came to the grunge movement.
I think the grunge thing was good for rock and roll because it got back to the essence of what rock and roll is. Big volume, raw emotion. A bunch of guys can't really play their instruments very well, but they have the passion that is rock and roll.
So yeah, the 90s were great. Although there were a couple of things...
Oh, what now?
As I said before, musically, I don't feel like the 90s really broke quite as much new ground, at least as far as rock and roll was concerned. And you're right, it really did feel like this was the last time rock and roll exploded on the scene, at least as we had come to know it.
It's also considered to be like the last vital movement in the history of rock music, really.
There's really never been another Nevermind or Dookie to impact pop culture like those albums did. In fact, I almost feel like maybe this is where the series should end. Look, let me speak candidly for a minute here. I just don't really feel like I have much to say about the 2000s. I was basically in a whole different world musically at the time. If I was to cover the 2000s, I'd really have to talk about it through my own eyes. But if there are some artists from the 2000s that you think made a huge impact on rock and roll, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Or go to my Facebook page, or my Twitter, or my website, whatever you'd like to do. And we'll see you all next time.
For now, we're gonna close this out with Magical Beat. See you then!
Thanks for watching this video. Who's your favorite 90s artist that doesn't blow? What 2000s artist do you want us to show?